This is the Lockpicking Engineer, and what I have for you today is a small explanation of how picking pin tumbler locks works. So when you look at a pin tumbler lock, as most common locks you'll see this, a cylinder here and maybe a pin protruding right here around a housing. The cylinder actually goes all the way through here. So in a diagram, you'll see something like this. You'll see the plug that's here and a housing around it, and the goal is to use the key to rotate the plug. Rotation is prevented by a series of chambers, each one of which has a key pin in red and a driver pin in blue, and a spring here that pushes on the driver pin down. Now, if you try to turn the plug, well, this is just in standard form, the driver will block plug rotation. What a key does is lift the key pin up so that the boundary between the key pin and the driver pin falls exactly at the shear line between these two surfaces, the plug and the housing. Normally you'll have more than one pin, you'll have something like 5 pins, and what a key will do is lift each one to the right height, and this allows the plug to move. If one position in the key is too low, then the driver will be blocking plug rotation, and if that position is too high, then the key pin will be blocking plug rotation. Now, in order to pick these, we have to realize that because of mechanical imperfections, even though the pins should be aligned like so, in reality they're kind of aligned like this, with small imperfections in their angle and their sides. And so when you're trying to turn a lock by applying some torque on the plug, what's actually binding you is only one of the pins at any given time. In this case, in this animation, it's this pin. And so all the other pins will actually just, if you touch them with a pick, put a piece of metal and try to push up, those pins will feel springy because there's a spring here that's preventing you from moving. But that pin will actually feel frictionful, and it'll prevent you from moving it up if you try to. That is the pin that you are picking. So in this case, you pick it, and now this pin is set, it's no longer blocking rotation, and you pick the next pin, and so on and so forth. And because you're applying torque on the plug, as soon as you get that binding pin to the right height, it will actually allow the plug to rotate a bit, and now the top of the pin, the driver, is now sitting on top of the plug and will not come down again. You've successfully picked that pin. Let's see some examples of how this looks. Here I have a lock that's transparent, and so you can see how the pins are moving. First, I insert a tensioner at the bottom of the keyway that lets me apply torque on the plug to rotate it. While applying torque, I use a pick to see which pins feel binding. On the ones that are binding, so that means they try to not let me move them up, I move them up until I hear a click. When I hear a click on all of them, this means that they're all set and the lock can open. Alright, now let's see it with a real lock. So here's an actual lock that I've pinned up with a single pin just to make this demo easier. So I apply some torque at the bottom of the keyway, and I use a pick to lift that single pin to the right position. And this allows plug rotation. Now this was much easier than your regular door lock because it has a single pin, but I want to show you how this looks inside in real life. So I remove the tailpiece, and this allows me to remove the cylinder from the housing. I rotate this plug a bit just to make sure that nothing bad happens with the pins and springs. And I use a follower to push the plug out of the housing. And now you can see how I've pinned it with a single pin, the first one, and how it's pushed up and down using the key. When the key is inserted to the right height, the actual hole is filled up to be flat against the cylinder. And when it's too high or too low, that would prevent plug rotation because this driver that now jumped up would be preventing plug rotation if the key pin is too low. And that's the spring that was pushing the driver. Now, just in case you think this happens only because it's a single pin, this is a master lock that I bought at the hardware store the other day. And so let's see how long it takes to pick. And we're open. Now, for really low quality locks, you don't need to pick it one pin at a time. You can use a tool called a rake to sort of brute force it or bully it to find a position such that all the heights match. Now I'd like to show you some high security locks. This is a multi-lock which has pins inside pins. So inside the groove for a big outer pin, there's a small dimple for an inner pin. This is a medico, so not only here do the pins have to be at the right height, but they have to be rotated to the right angle. This lock has pins coming from multiple directions. You have pins from the right, from the left, and from below. This is a Kaba Micro, a tiny little lock that's still pretty difficult to pick. This is an ASA Twin 6000, which has essentially 2 rows of pins that you have to pick. The lock sport community treats locks as mechanical puzzles and tries to solve them. They don't pick locks that are in use or that don't belong to them. The culture is quite welcoming, and it's really a family-friendly mechanical puzzle solving sport. For example, this is a lock that I got as a challenge from someone else, and after I pick it, I'm going to send it along to another picker to have more fun. There's also several artists in the community who make tools for lockpicking. This is a pick that I got last month. If this sounds interesting, please visit the Lockpicking subreddit, check the wiki, and the Discord.